Welcome to the University of Northampton Popular Music Podcast. Today we're talking to our senior lecturer and performance lead tutor, Tim Smart, who, as well as playing the Pyramid Stage at Glastonbury, touring the world with one of the UK's most influential bands, the Specials, playing for 10 years on the West End stage with the Book of Mormon, is talking to us today about being a musician and teacher.
Hi everyone. As Stace said, I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Northampton, teaching the second and third years performance modules. Outside this, I'm a trombone player. For the last 12 years, I was the trombone player for the Specials. We toured the world, did a couple of albums which made it to number 1 and number 2 respectively. Did all the major festivals around the world, international touring, which was wonderful. As well as doing that, for the last 10 years, I've been the trombone player for the Book of Mormon in the West End, which is written by the South Park guys. Content-wise, pretty much exactly what you'd imagine a musical written by the South Park guys would sound like. So that's been a lot of fun. That's been 8 shows a week consistently for the last 10 years. So my starting diet of gigs, if you like, is 416 gigs a year. And then whatever else I kind of tack in around that. Other than that, I've done some freelance work, or quite a lot of freelance work, including the Heritage Orchestra, playing with Tim Minchin and Goldie and Pete Tong, doing all those kind of projects. And then other bits and bobs like Rag and Bone Man, Jamie Cullum, Elbow, Prince Buster, Ocean Colour Scene and Spanish Harlem Orchestra. I had a couple of nights of playing at Ronnie Scott's, playing second trombone for them, which was absolutely awesome. I've been lucky enough to have a pretty varied career playing on stages, you know, some of the major stages, Pyramid Stage and Glastonbury. We did that in 2009 with the Specials. You know, it's quite a levelling factor looking out on 100,000 people with a TV camera stuffed up your nose, and then you get to the solo at the end. There's plenty of evidence of YouTube of me attempting to get things right, with the full knowledge that everything you play is going to follow you for the rest of your days. You know, it's one thing doing a gig where it's there and it's gone, but when you know that every single thing you do will follow you from that point onwards, because it'll always be on YouTube. All those performances I've done are up on YouTube, and every little clip, I know where every single one is. So with the Specials, we did the David Letterman show. There's one note in there that every time I listen to, I have to fight the urge to go back in time and just fix that one. But that's the nature of live performance, you know. So yeah, there's been lots of experiences along those lines, whether it be live TV. I've had to do solos at 8 o'clock in the morning in a freezing cold, deserted TV studios for Soccer AM. And we'd done a gig the previous night at the 100 Club in London, hot, sweaty, loud. All went back to the hotel for about 4 hours sleep, and then got to the studio at 6:30 in the morning. And then at 8 o'clock we were on one take bash. It was it's been an interesting career.
How did you get into playing, Tim?
Well, my family are all musicians. My older sister she was a classical cellist, and then she met some Israelis on a plane, lived in Israel for 10 years, and now plays Middle Eastern music and jazz. My background, I'd started, getting instrumental lessons when I was a kid at school. But I was quite lucky. I grew up in Leicester, and as a place to grow up, it's got a fantastic and very vibrant and very diverse music scene. So as well as doing the more classically related stuff that I was doing as part of sort of schooling, I got into hanging around with all the local musos working in the Leicester scene. So I met a guy called Stan in the Narborough Arms, just in South Leicester, when I was about 16 or 17. He was playing in a Wham tribute band with my then A-level music teacher. And I got chatting to him, and as it turns out, the trombone player who had been doing a lot of work for him had moved to the States, and he was sort of looking around for someone. So I ended up doing a load of ska and reggae stuff and funk stuff. I'm eternally grateful for those guys taking a slightly overconfident 16, 17-year-old under their wing and putting me in the back of a transit van and dragging me around the country, and dropping me off just as the sun was rising for me to go to double maths in the morning, But in terms of a way of learning, learning off tapes, learning by ear, all those sort of things that I wouldn't necessarily have done had I stayed in just purely playing the classical stuff I was doing otherwise. It gave me a whole different way of learning, a whole different way of playing, and stylistically opened up so many more doors to what I was doing. So then I went to music college. I had 4 years at the Royal Academy of Music, which their version of music education is fairly, you are going to be an orchestral trombone player. And I never wanted to go down that line, so I kind of fought against it a bit for 4 years, while also doing some jazz stuff, some pop stuff, some of this, some of that, so doing all these different styles of music, which is the background I grew up in Leicester. So when I left college, I didn't really know where life was heading. But gradually, as all these things do, they odd meetings and places. You meet someone in a pub and get chatting to them, or you meet someone on a gig, and somehow out of this kind of melting pot of stuff comes a career. And a couple of years later, you look back and go, "Oh, I'd never realised at the time that person that I met, in such and such a place would be so vital to everything I've done," which is what's been so curious. And you look back over your career and there's all these key moments that at the time didn't seem to be anything at all, but actually turned out to be incredibly important, which is a further reminder of when you are meeting people, be nice. Don't be a prima donna. And if you're doing a gig, be there, be on time, play all the right things in all the right places. Don't behave like you're the most famous person in the room. Be a professional. And if you're doing that, word gets around. This guy, Stan, was playing for Prince Buster's band, who was one of the original Jamaican ska artists. So I was playing for Prince Buster's band by the time I was 18, 19. There's somewhere on YouTube, there's a hilarious video of us me miming to Wine and Grind from about 1998, I think. But I mean, and Prince Buster, I found out later, such an iconic ska artist, did loads of work with him. And so then when the Specials got back together again in 2007, 2008, things started to happen. I'd met enough of the guys who were doing that scene to be in a position to be asked to do the Specials. And things went from there. So it was an incredible journey of essentially chance encounters, but also being there, being on time, being pleasant and doing the job as well as I possibly could at all stages has meant that when those opportunities arise, I'm in the best place to be carried forward by them.
What was the best thing then, Tim, about playing with the Specials? It was
an absolute honour to play with a band that is still credited as being one of the most influential British bands of all time. Added to that, the trombone chair for that band is it's the best trombone gig going. There are all these massive, very iconic solos. The trombone has always been associated with ska. It's quite an important voice in ska. It's also an important voice in Latin music in particular, but in ska, it's such a central voice to play, and it played a central voice in the Specials when they were initially coming to the fore with an amazing trombone player called Rico Rodriguez, who was an iconic Jamaican ska trombone player, or iconic Jamaican trombone player. And my job when I got the Specials role was to emulate him as much as I possibly could. And so, doing these amazing solos like Ghost Town, like A Message to You, Rudy, like Do Nothing, they were incredible solos that everybody in the room knew. So when we started doing the touring, we'd get to the end of Ghost Town, we had this massive trombone solo to do, and the crowd was singing it along with me, which on one level was amazing, on another level was absolutely terrifying, because it sets the bar of being perfect, as that's just what we expect. And as time went on, as we released some more music, a couple of those solos that I played every night became solos that I'd played in the studio. One in particular, Vote For Me, came out in one take, and then I had to emulate that, and I kind of set myself at that kind of bar. But yeah, it was an absolute honour, an absolute privilege to tour in the way we did. And as I said, we did main stage Glastonbury, we did all the major Festival, Coachella, we did all of those. We did TV dates, including The Letterman Show, including Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, later with Jules Holland over here. These fantastic kind of TV performances, again, which you start playing and you're aware that every single thing you do will be there and immortalised forevermore. So there's that kind of real sense of pressure and trying to do it perfectly. And do it perfectly doesn't necessarily mean without risk and without vibe. It means you take every risk going, get as much vibe as you possibly can, and every single thing you do comes off. And every now and again you get those perfect moments where it all lines up. Yeah, I mean, you stand on a stage in front of 100,000 people, and it's quite the experience. Glastonbury, I can still remember you as you look up over the hill, you just people as far as the eye can see in all directions. There's the microphone in front of you, go. And that's the job. That's the reality of that role. It was amazing. So you learn these techniques of almost shutting out all of those people, because if you spend all the time looking around, there's a danger you become overwhelmed. So in certain bits of the set, I had to just zone in on my little workspace and play the solo as perfectly as I could. And then once that bit's over, you can kind of enjoy it a bit more holistically. But there's also an interesting skill, the flip side round, of when you're doing a TV studio thing, and it's a deserted studio. In COVID times, that was particularly apparent. There, you have to imagine that there's 100,000 people looking at you, so you can put on that kind of vibey performance that people want to see. So the skill of being able to put yourself in a performance space mentally is actually quite important as you go through those things. But that first gig that we did on the Specials Reunion Tour in 2009 was in the O2 Academy in Newcastle. And I swear, as I looked at the balcony, it was bending because of everyone jumping up and down. It was the most astonishing energy in the room that I've probably ever experienced. So well done, Newcastle, full marks.
What's the best thing then about playing for South Park's The Book of Mormon in the West End?
Okay, so The Book of Mormon it's a very, very funny show if you're a fan of South Park and stuff in particular. In our little space down in the darkness, there's 8 of us in the band. So musical director, violin, sax, playing sort of flute and other things, trumpet, trombone, guitar, bass, another keyboard player, and drummer. It's a fun show. It's a reasonably short show. The band are lovely. Everyone wants to play it perfectly every night, and that's the skill of doing a show like that. Yes, it'd be easy to say, at the end of the year, I've played 416 shows this year. This one, it doesn't matter if I miss this bit out. No, for the audience, it's the first time and possibly only time they've seen that show. So your job, sitting down there doing that show or doing that, playing in that context, is to play it perfectly every night. Bang, 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 bang. And that's the gig there. And I get paid every week to play the trombone. It's paid for my house. It's putting my kids through school. It is an amazing job to have. And it's a job that you only have if you're capable of playing that kind of music as, perfectly every night, consistently, week on week, year on year. And that's the major challenge, is to keep things fresh enough so it sounds good to the audience who are hearing it for the first time. Some of the music I've played, like the special stuff, was always memorised. Mormon, because it's on dotted notation in front of me, I've almost turned that bit of my brain off because I don't need to memorise the show, so I don't have to. So what inevitably it means is that sometimes I'll be playing away and my brain will be off doing something else for a bit. And then I'll look back at the page and go, where am I? And then I realise that actually we're 2 pages on from where we were. All the notes have been absolutely fine. So there's a certain degree of that. It's a little bit like running down an escalator. You're fine until you look at your feet and go, oh, that's clever. I wonder how they're doing that. That's the point where you trip over. So there's that. There is always a certain degree, and the same applies for driving and all these other complex skills. There's a certain degree of automaticity kind of needed. It's a question of how you manage that.
Okay, so what are the important elements of being a musician?
Okay, so it's first the important to sort of note that being a good musician and doing it as a job require 2 slightly different sort of skill sets. But I mean, obviously as a musician, you're looking for technique. A good technique gives you good sound, good production, good all those things. But then good technique on its own is meaningless unless it's used in musical ways. So when you're looking at another performance, you're listening to things like phrasing, you're listening to tuning, you're listening to the nuances that take these notes in this order and turn it into something that's genuinely musical. You're also looking for things like stage presence and communication. Does the person that you're watching and listening to, are they engaging to you? Do you feel like they're communicating to you, or are they just operating in their own little box? So there's a lot of elements that go into that, and within that, then you've got different styles, you've got different ways of performing, and the best musicians tend to be the ones that can work out what style they're in, therefore work out musically what the right thing to do is, technically what the right thing to do is, the way to portray themselves, how to communicate with the audience, how to communicate and listen to the musicians around them. And many of those skills aren't specifically musical. The ability to be aware and react to the people around you appropriately is a life skill. So that wider awareness of the context in which you're in, the people in which you're around, and then how you adapt what you do to fit in with the overall thing, because ultimately the music, the output is the most important thing. And ego control does come into that. You know, we've all seen performances and gigs where the person sitting next to you or the person on stage is doing something that is showing off. Look at me, look at me, look at me, without any awareness of the people around them and the effect that it's having. It doesn't always go well. So actually the ability to know what your ego is doing at any particular point is also a pretty key skill. Sure. So you roll all those things up in a ball and then add in being on time. Have all the right equipment and all the right stuff with you that's all working, and be pleasant to be around socially. You know, the ability to communicate and interact with musicians socially is incredibly important, because ultimately you don't want to work and play with someone that you dislike. No. Because what's the point in that? In a professional environment, sometimes you have to, of course, make musical decisions that you wouldn't necessarily do. Sometimes you have to work with people that you don't necessarily choose to socialise with. But that's part of the job of being a musician, which is linked to being, a good musician. But they're slightly different skill sets and slightly different ways of doing things. So it's an interesting challenge being a good musician. It's also an interesting challenge being a good professional musician. And you can be one, potentially, without being so much of the other.
So the next question I'm going to ask you, I'm hoping that you'll come back in a future podcast and expand on this more. But as well as playing at the Pyramid stage in Glastonbury, as well as touring the world with the Specials, one of the UK's most influential bands, as well as playing on the West End for 10 years for the Book of Mormon, you're also a fantastic colleague here at the university, and you're a brilliant teacher, and all of our students think you're awesome. So would you mind telling us a little bit about why you like teaching, please?
Well, teaching is the profession that makes all of the professions. Being a musician, you want to leave things behind. You want to leave evidence of your presence, evidence of your output. Some of my output is through music making. A fair amount of it, an increasing amount of it, is through teaching. And actually, I think it gives me enormous pleasure to see students coming on the course and then leaving the course having developed. It gives me great pleasure to see some of my ex-students touring the world. One of my ex-guitar students is currently doing a world tour with one of the musicals. And it's brilliant. So every now and again he pops up on Facebook. That I see as a major success. And it's also about looking back at my own education, which by no means was perfect. And there were lots of bits of mine that I really thought were extremely poor looking back. Here's a chance for me to actually dig my heels in and do things that I think will be better, will be more beneficial to the next generation of students. And so I think that's incredibly important as a way of making sure that music and music making is enhanced for everybody as they go through their education and off into their lives.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks to everyone out there listening to this. If you enjoyed this podcast, found it useful, helpful, please like and subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment down below.